The studio lights were blinding, the air thick with anticipation, and the unmistakable voice of Bill O'Reilly cut through the tension like a knife. "Let me finish, Congresswoman," he barked, his tone sharp, his posture rigid, his eyes fixed on his guest. It was only 8 minutes into the Fox Nation special, but already the temperature in the room had risen. The audience, both in the studio and at home, could sense it. This wasn't going to be a polite policy discussion. This was a showdown. Jasmine Crockett, the freshman congresswoman from Texas, sat across from O'Reilly, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression calm but alert. She had been invited to discuss her new economic development bill, a piece of legislation aimed at revitalizing underserved communities through targeted investments and public-private partnerships. But as the cameras rolled, it became clear that O'Reilly had other plans. He wasn't interested in a nuanced debate. He wanted a spectacle. O'Reilly's reputation preceded him. For decades, he had dominated cable news with his confrontational style, his rapid-fire interruptions, and his refusal to let guests finish a thought if it didn't fit his narrative. Tonight, he was in rare form. Every time Crockett began to explain the details of her bill, O'Reilly would cut her off, waving his pen, raising his voice, and demanding straight answers without political spin. The pattern was relentless. He interrupted her once, then again, each time more forceful, more dismissive. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice or roll her eyes. Instead, she maintained a steady composure, answering each question with clarity and precision, refusing to be rattled by O'Reilly's tactics. The contrast was striking. O'Reilly, the seasoned host, growing more agitated with each exchange. Crockett, the newcomer, growing only more resolute. The first interruption came less than a minute into the interview. O'Reilly asked, "Your economic development bill proposes investments in underserved communities. How do you justify more government spending when inflation is already a concern?" Crockett began, "Thank you for having me, Bill. This legislation actually tackles inflation but O'Reilly cut in. But it's still more government spending, isn't it?" "That's a fact." "More taxpayer money?" He leaned forward, his voice rising, trying to seize control. Crockett smiled faintly. "If I could finish my point, the bill is fully funded by closing corporate tax loopholes." "That's always the same excuse," O'Reilly interrupted again, waving his pen. "Let's be honest. This is just wealth redistribution under a new label, right?" The pattern repeated. Every time Crockett started to explain the bill's actual mechanics, O'Reilly jumped in with louder interruptions, trying to steer her off course. "Our viewers don't care about technicalities," he said dismissively. "They want to know why Democrats always think spending fixes everything." His voice climbed with each interruption, the trademark pen-pointing gesture returning as he accused her of filibustering. Through it all, Crockett stayed poised, focusing on economic data and community impact without raising her voice once. The camera crew exchanged surprised glances. They were used to guests stumbling under pressure, not staying perfectly calm. The third interruption came as Crockett tried to cite independent studies showing the bill's impact. "Let me finish, Congresswoman. That's how this works. I ask questions. You give straight answers. No political spin. Now answer the question about your party's economic plan." The studio air grew heavy. Viewers could see Crockett take a steady breath before replying. "Mr. O'Reilly," she said firmly but politely, "you've interrupted me 3 times in less than 5 minutes. I've done my best to respond with respect and substance. If you want an actual conversation, I'm happy to continue. But if this is just about creating conflict for ratings, we can stop here, and I'll gladly talk with journalists who care about facts." A hush fell over the set. For the first time in years, O'Reilly didn't have an instant comeback. He shifted in his chair, visibly uncomfortable. "I'm giving you tough questions. That's my job," he muttered defensively. "If you can't handle, I welcome tough questions," Crockett interrupted, still calm. "What I don't welcome is being invited for an interview where I'm not allowed to answer them. There's a big difference between real journalism and performative interruption." O'Reilly's jaw tightened, and camera operators later said they had never seen him look so off balance. Trying to regain control, he quickly changed the topic. Let's move on to crime in major cities, he said abruptly. Your party has consistently— I'd be happy to discuss that, Crockett replied smoothly. But let's make sure we're actually having a conversation first. Will you allow me to finish my answers, Mr. O'Reilly? Or should your viewers expect more interruptions? The question, delivered without anger but with steady authority, froze the studio. It was a direct challenge to his interviewing style, and everyone in the control room felt the tension spike. Crew members later said they saw O'Reilly's expression shift the moment he realized his trademark tactics were failing. I let all my guests answer, he insisted defensively, though his 4 previous interruptions told a different story. But I don't allow filibustering or talking points. Still calm and composed, responded evenly. Substantive answers require context, especially when we're talking about national economic policy. If you label every complete explanation as a filibuster while rewarding shallow sound bites, you're not informing your audience. You're shortchanging them. The statement landed like a gavel. O'Reilly's jaw tightened, irritation flashing across his face. He tried to reassert control, leaning in with his next question. All right, Congresswoman, let's try again. In simple terms, without political spin, why isn't your economic plan just another tax and spend liberal policy that's already failed countless times before? The tone was dismissive, almost mocking, a clear attempt to bait her into anger. But Crockett didn't take the bait. The crew held their breath, sensing a major moment approaching. Viewers would later debate this scene endlessly online, analyzing how one exchange completely reversed decades of O'Reilly interview dominance. Instead of snapping back, Congresswoman Crockett did something that would be replayed and analyzed for weeks to come. She smiled, a small, confident smile that instantly changed the energy in the room. Mr. O'Reilly, she began, her voice unwavering, I'm going to answer your question thoroughly, and I'd appreciate the professional courtesy of not being interrupted again. The words were delivered with such calm authority that even O'Reilly, for a split second, seemed unsure how to respond. She continued, Before I came to Congress, I spent 15 years in courtrooms. Interrupting an attorney or witness would earn an objection or even sanctions from a judge. In professional debate, you let people complete their thoughts. That's how real dialogue works. She paused, locking eyes with O'Reilly, who seemed momentarily caught off guard. Then she continued, Now about your question. The legislation I've proposed isn't a traditional government spending plan. It's a public-private partnership model. That means limited federal seed funding used to attract much larger private investments. For every federal dollar, we've seen $9 of private capital flow into local economies. Her explanation was clear, data-driven, and impossible to dismiss. In communities where similar models were piloted, she added, median household income rose by 23% over 5 years. Small business creation doubled. Property values stabilized, and long-term residents weren't displaced. O'Reilly opened his mouth to interrupt again. Crockett subtly raised her hand, a calm but unmistakable signal to let her finish. The approach is based on models developed by Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, she continued, and it's already received bipartisan support in multiple state legislatures. In fact, Republican Governor Phil Scott of Vermont publicly praised its fiscal responsibility and return on investment. Then came the line that would instantly go viral. So to directly answer your question, this isn't a tax and spend liberal policy, Crockett said steadily. It's an evidence-based growth strategy supported by economists from Milton Friedman to Friedrich Hayek. It strengthens market efficiency, demands measurable outcomes, and ends automatically if benchmarks aren't met. I welcome tough questions about this approach, but those questions should reflect the actual policy, not partisan talking points. The studio went silent. For a man who built his brand on controlling every conversation, Bill O'Reilly suddenly had nothing to say. The cameras caught him shuffling his papers, searching for words. His famous confidence faltered. Viewers later described the silence as the moment the lion blinked. After several awkward seconds, O'Reilly tried to recover. Well, that sounds good in theory, he began. But Crockett didn't miss a beat. It's not theory, she interjected smoothly, using his own interruption tactic against him. We have 5 years of data from programs in Texas, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, all showing these same results. I can send your producers the full reports from the Brookings Institution and the American Enterprise Institute. They both confirm the model's effectiveness. By now, the power dynamic had completely flipped. O'Reilly, the man known for dominating every exchange, was on the defensive. "Our viewers don't need an economics lecture," he muttered, attempting to regain control. Crockett smiled again. "Your viewers deserve accurate information about policies that shape their communities," she replied. "If presenting facts feels like a lecture, maybe that says more about the depth of discussion on this program than it does about my answers." The room fell silent again. The producers, the crew, even O'Reilly himself, all knew they had just witnessed something historic. Within hours, that clip would explode across social media with headlines like "Crockett silences O'Reilly live on air" and "The interview that changed cable news." This powerful response, delivered calmly yet with sharp precision, completely threw O'Reilly off balance. The man, known for his dominance and quick retorts, suddenly seemed unsure of what to say. In the control room, producers watched in disbelief as the famously confident host struggled to regain his footing. One of them quickly whispered through his earpiece, "We should cut to a break," trying to save him from the growing tension on air. "We'll take a quick break and come back with Congresswoman Crockett," O'Reilly announced, his relief almost visible as the camera stopped rolling. He took off his mic and immediately called over his executive producer. Crew members overheard him saying, "Why wasn't I properly briefed about her background? She's clearly not your average congressional guest." Meanwhile, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat calmly at her desk, reviewing her notes as if nothing unusual had happened. Unlike many guests who left O'Reilly's set rattled, she showed complete confidence. No stress, no frustration, just focus. When the show returned from the break, viewers immediately sensed a change in O'Reilly's attitude. The interruptions stopped. His tone softened. For once, he allowed his guest to finish her sentences. The transformation was so noticeable that one production assistant later said, "I've never seen anything like that." O'Reilly actually changed his entire interview style in the middle of the segment. He started listening. That never happens. By the end of their exchange, what had started as a heated confrontation had turned into something rare for O'Reilly's show, a genuine, in-depth policy discussion. The audience could see that the power dynamic had completely flipped. As the segment wrapped up, O'Reilly reached out his hand and said respectfully, "Congresswoman Crockett, thank you for your time. You clearly came prepared." Was the closest thing to an on-air concession viewers had ever seen from him. Have you ever seen someone completely change their tone mid-conversation when they realized their usual tactics weren't working? Tell us what happened in the comments. The impact of Crockett's interviews spread like wildfire. Within hours, clips of her calmly commanding the discussion after O'Reilly's fifth interruption went viral. The hashtag let her finish started trending across social media. News outlets from both sides of the aisle replayed the exchange, calling it one of the most powerful moments on cable news that year. Media analyst Carlos Mendez appeared on CNN the next morning, shaking his head in admiration. What made Congresswoman Crockett so effective wasn't that she fought back in anger. It was that she refused to play O'Reilly's game. She changed the tone of the interview completely, and O'Reilly had to follow her lead. Even conservative commentator Brittany Hughes, while disagreeing with Crockett's politics, admitted that her performance was masterful. Whether or not you share her views, Crockett gave a lesson in how to handle aggressive interviewers. She stayed calm, precise, and professional, and that's what made her stand out. Within just 24 hours, the clip hit over 50 million views. It was shared by journalists, professors, and public figures across the country. Former White House Communications Director Jennifer Palmieri tweeted, "Every public speaker should study this moment." Crockett showed you can be assertive without being hostile, confident without being defensive. For O'Reilly, however, it was a rare setback. A man known for always being in control suddenly became the subject of endless memes and highlight videos, comparing his usual dominating style to his uncomfortable silence that day. 3 days later, O'Reilly addressed the viral clip on his podcast. I asked tough questions and she gave detailed answers. That's how good interviews work, he insisted. People saying I was stunned are wrong. I was listening as any professional host should. But viewers weren't buying it. The footage told a different story, one where O'Reilly's interruptions, irritation, and eventual silence were clearly visible. Media critics called out the irony, the host famous for talking over guests now claiming he was just listening. For Congresswoman Crockett, though, the interview became a defining career moment. She received invitations from morning shows and news programs nationwide. But instead of feeding the viral drama, she redirected the attention back to policy. On MSNBC's Morning Joe, she explained, "I didn't go on that show to create a viral clip. I went to talk about real economic solutions for working families. The fact that being calm and factual made headlines says more about our media culture than about me." Her words resonated deeply, reminding everyone that true leadership isn't about volume or theatrics. It's about clarity, composure, and substance. This powerful exchange further strengthened Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett's reputation as a leader who values real discussion over performance. After the viral O'Reilly interview, her image in Washington changed dramatically. Colleagues on both sides of the aisle began to see her not as a newcomer learning the ropes, but as a serious and prepared lawmaker. Political reporter Sandra Mitchell explained, "Before that moment, many thought she was just another freshman representative. Afterward, even senior members treated her with new respect. Committee hearings noticeably shifted whenever Crockett was present. Lawmakers who might have dismissed her before now listened more carefully, aware that she was not someone who could be interrupted or talked over icily." Perhaps the most surprising impact came from congressional communications teams across Washington. Dozens of offices began requesting one thing from their media trainers: "Get me the Crockett training. Workshops on how to stay composed under pressure and maintain message control during tough." Interviews suddenly saw a record demand from both Democrats and Republicans. Even journalism schools began teaching the O'Reilly-Crockett exchange as a case study. Professors showed students how her calm, structured responses turned an aggressive interview into a lesson in professionalism. Columbia Journalism School professor Richard Torres told his class, "Watch how Congresswoman Crockett directly addresses the real issue, the constant interruptions, and then guides the discussion back to substance. That's how you re-establish respect without losing composure." 6 months later, her influence was still being felt throughout political media. Guests across TV networks began adopting what analysts started calling the Crockett approach. Interviewees were now openly calling out interruptions, while hosts became noticeably more cautious about cutting guests off, especially female politicians, who historically faced more interruptions than men. Media research group Idioscope even published data confirming what many had observed. "We're seeing what we call the Crockett Effect," their report said. Guest interruptions across political talk shows dropped by nearly 23% over the past year, with the biggest changes happening in interviews with women leaders. For O'Reilly himself, the incident became a turning point. About 6 weeks after that unforgettable interview, he invited Crockett back on his show. But this time, things were different. Viewers noticed a calmer tone and a far more respectful style. O'Reilly opened the segment by saying, "I think we had a constructive conversation last time, and I'd like to continue exploring your economic ideas in more detail." It was an astonishing shift, proof that even a seasoned host known for his tough, interruptive style could evolve when challenged with professionalism and poise. For audiences used to political interviews, it's filled with shouting and talking points. The Crocketorially exchange offered something refreshing: real, thoughtful dialogue. Veteran political journalist Robert McKenzie summarized it perfectly. "What makes this moment historic isn't just that Congresswoman Crockett held her ground. It's that she raised the level of conversation while doing it. She didn't just win the argument. She changed how political interviews could work." A full year after the viral exchange, the impact was still visible. Media trainers, communications directors, and journalism professors continued referencing it as a turning point. The day a freshman congresswoman with a trial lawyer's confidence changed one of the most combative TV formats in history. Media analyst Jennifer Crawford later reflected. In an era where politics often looks more like a shouting match than a debate, Jasmine Crockett proved that preparation, calmness, and focus are more powerful than volume or aggression. That lesson reshaped how political figures prepared for interviews and, perhaps even more importantly, how viewers expected journalists to behave. The takeaway for public officials was crystal clear: real expertise, steady confidence, and a refusal to be baited are far stronger than emotional outbursts or defensive reactions. By calmly rewriting the rules of engagement, Crockett didn't just win one viral moment. She set a new standard for political communication that continues to inspire interviews. Today, if you found this deep dive into how composure and preparation can transform even the most hostile interviews valuable, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more breakdowns of iconic political moments. The fight for better, more meaningful political discussions is still ongoing, and informed viewers like you play a huge role in pushing for that change. Which political interviews have changed the way you view the media? And what lessons from Congresswoman Crockett's strategy do you think other leaders should learn? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The legacy of that night in the Fox Nation studio continued to ripple outward, far beyond the world of cable news. In the months that followed, Crockett Effect became a shorthand in political circles for a new kind of media presence, one that valued substance over spectacle and composure over confrontation. It wasn't just politicians who took notice. Corporate leaders, nonprofit advocates, and even athletes began referencing the viral moment as a model for how to handle pressure and reclaim. The narrative in high-stakes interviews in Washington, the shift was unmistakable. Congressional hearings, once notorious for grandstanding and interruptions, began to reflect a new tone. Lawmakers who had watched Crockett's performance realized that the public was hungry for real answers, not just sound bites. The House Committee on Economic Development, where Crockett now served as a rising star, saw a marked change in decorum. Members on both sides of the aisle gave each other more space to speak, and the quality of debate improved. Journalists covering the Hill noted that even the most combative members seemed to think twice before cutting off a witness or a colleague. Meanwhile, Crockett's own profile soared. She was invited to speak at universities, leadership conferences, and media summits across the country. Her message was always the same: preparation, respect, and clarity are your best tools. Don't let anyone define the terms of your conversation for you. She became a sought-after guest not just for her policy expertise, but for her ability to elevate the tone of any discussion. When she appeared on NPR's All Things Considered, the host introduced her as the Congresswoman who taught cable news a lesson in civility. The story of her exchange with O'Reilly became a staple in communications workshops. Trainers played the clip to illustrate how to handle interruptions, how to redirect a conversation, and how to maintain control without ever raising your voice. One media coach remarked, "What Crockett did wasn't just about politics. It was about leadership under fire." She showed that you can be assertive without being aggressive, and that's a lesson everyone can use. Even O'Reilly, in his own way, acknowledged the impact. In a rare moment of candor, during a later interview, he admitted, "I've always believed in tough questions. Maybe I pushed too hard that night." Crockett was prepared and she made her case. That's what viewers want. Real answers, not just a fight. It was as close to an apology as anyone could remember from the famously combative host. The broader media landscape began to shift as well. Producers at major networks started rethinking their approach to political interviews. Instead of seeking viral moments through conflict, they began to prioritize depth and clarity. New shows emerged, promising conversations, not confrontations, and audiences responded. Ratings for these programs climbed, while the appetite for endless shouting matches waned. For Crockett, the most meaningful feedback came not from pundits or politicians, but from ordinary viewers. Letters and emails poured into her office from across the country. A retired teacher from Ohio wrote, "Thank you for showing my students that you don't have to shout to be heard." A single mother in Georgia said, "You gave me hope that real leaders still exist." Even high school debate teams sent messages of thanks. Inspired by her example, a year after the interview, Crockett reflected on the 5 experience in a keynote address at the National Press Club. That night wasn't about me versus Bill O'Reilly, she said. It was about the power of staying true to your message, no matter how loud the other side gets. It was about showing that facts, patience, and respect can win the day, even in the noisiest room. Her words resonated far beyond the walls of the press club. The Crockett Effect became a case study in business schools, a topic in leadership seminars, and a rallying cry for a new generation of public servants. It was proof that one moment of composure could change not just a conversation, but an entire culture as the dust settled. The lesson was clear. In an age of viral outrage and endless interruptions, the real power belongs to those who can keep their cool, command the facts, and refuse to be defined by someone else's script. Jasmine Crockett's final response to Bill O'Reilly wasn't just a viral sensation. It was a blueprint for a better, more honest public discourse, and as millions watched, shared, and learned from that moment, the message was unmistakable. The future of political conversation belongs to those who listen, those who prepare, and those who lead with integrity. In the end, it wasn't the interruptions that people remembered. It was the silence that followed, a silence filled with respect, possibility, the hope that, just maybe, the way we talk about our country can change for the better.